Call the meeting to order and welcome everyone to the City of Kalispell's work session for August 26, 2024. Can I have a roll call?
Councillor Nunnally.
Here.
Councillor Carlson. Councillor Gabrielle.
Here.
Councillor Graham.
Here.
Councillor Dowd.
Here.
Councillor Dahlman. Councillor Fisher. Councillor Hunter.
Here.
And Mayor Johnson.
Here. We have three items for discussion this evening at this work session. The first item is Kalispell Golf Association lease extension. Mr. Russell?
Yeah, Mayor and Council. As identified in the memorandum, we've had an arrangement with the Kalispell Golf Association for quite some time, even going back before 2009. I think 1997 may have been the one before that. Kalispell Golf Association operates the golf course on city-owned property, so we've always been in a lease arrangement with the Kalispell Golf Association. It's gone through different variations over the time. The most recent, about 10 years ago, we did a memorandum of understanding that changed some of the arrangements as it related to capital improvements and the lease retention, being able to let the Kalispell Golf Association keep that in exchange for clearing up the responsibilities related to capital improvements and providing them or them accepting responsibility for those. We're coming up on the end of that 20-year lease, but even several years in advance, the Kalispell Golf Association is looking at trying to do some improvements potentially, and a little bit easier if there's a longer-term lease than potentially a 5-year program through there. So not something unusual to see a little bit more of a stronger arrangement going into the future that they can verify for any of those potential improvements. So with that, I just wanted to go over the draft proposed lease arrangement with Kalispell Golf Association, highlight just some of the changes, and there's very few of them, but then open it up for council if there's questions, and then would recommend at a future meeting actually authorizing the updated lease. So hitting the highlights of it, again, the last term was 20 years. The recommended one on this is 30 years. Really just looking at solidifying that as they look at potential debt instruments, and it's proven to be a pretty good relationship over the years, so don't see really any opportunity or problems with going with a 30-year term, but obviously you can have that for discussion. Again, some of this was cleanup as we talk about, the rent in this one and when payments are due. We kept it in that the rent payment and the capital improvement just to really highlight the memorandum of understanding and keep that really documented as to, there is a lease payment associated with this agreement. However, we've established the responsibilities and the nature of why that lease is retained by the Kalispell Golf Association. And again, that's because they're assuming all responsibilities that previously been identified as responsibility of the City of Kalispell in terms of some of those capital improvements. Going further down. Again, this is an addition. Previously we had a grant for a trail connection going up that hillside along Highway 93. During the design and development, Montana Department of Transportation said they did not want that adjacent to the highway component there or in the right of way. So that put a stop on that, and those funds were diverted over to 3 Mile for that project. Hasn't eliminated the need for a trail in there. We knew that would be part of the future discussions. So we'll put language in here just in case Montana Department of Transportation held true to not wanting it in the right of way. This would allow it to go through the Kalispell Golf Association playable surface area if need be. Obviously, the goal is to minimize that as much as possible. If there is a realignment required, that would be borne by the city for any of those costs. Ultimately, we think that MDT will allow it to go in the right of way through the most recent discussions, which would be best for everyone around. But ultimately, if it can't, this gives us the ability to place it within property if need be. And while there'll always be discussion on that, again, ultimately, this language gives that final authority to the city council for determination on that placement of it. Moving forward down, this one talking section, the decrease of fees or increase of fees used to be 10% without approval from the council. Now it's at 20%, which again, I don't see as a problem. And previously, you were looking at a component of the lease arrangement and amount of capital put back into it impacted what that lease would be, that payment would be. So there may have been more of a concern about the management of the affairs. That just really isn't there as much as it used to be in terms of the city's perspective. So we really don't have any concern with it being at 20%, that they can really manage the golf course according to the needs that they're finding and the cash flow that they're looking at. I missed one because we also went up to increasing, there we go, alterations or improvements. Used to be a threshold of $25,000 for any type of improvement project. As a request to bump that up to 75. Again, really kind of same concept. With that MOU in 2014, it really took us out of really type any concern with their funding, their financial packages, how they're doing it. Really kind of just separating it to really a true more of a private management component. And like I said, it's worked great over the past 10 years and really see no reason why that couldn't be bumped up to the $75,000 per their request. The rest, we're just looking at some different language cleanup. Get a lot of that. You can see how that lease arrangement used to be. Again, it's kind of a moot point, but really wanted to keep it in there to recognize the history and that it truly still is a lease component. Again, updated their fees, really just to kind of stay true to the historical nature of the agreement. And then just some language under the multiple use property. And this is really to kind of try and clarify that golfers could include guests of people golfing, spectators, some confusion of that in the previous language about, well, if there's a tournament, can people be on the course and be spectating, even though they're not golfers? So really just kind of clarifying some of that language related to that multiple use policy. And I think that is pretty much the meat of any of the changes. So not really a whole lot. Clarifying a few things, really extending the lease term is the impetus for the new arrangement, but allowed us to add in some additional things, such as the language related to the trail that may need to go through there. So really wanted to bring this forward at a work session just in case there were questions or any thoughts related to it. Otherwise, we'll put it on an action item at the next available meeting. But with that, happy to answer any questions. We do have representatives from Kalispell Golf Association here if there's any questions for them, but we'd be happy to entertain any questions that council may have related to it.
Ms. Gabriel?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Russell, just another cleanup question on that section 8, where you changed from 25 to 75,000. Do we need to also spell that out
Yeah,
in the
change the
text?
words.
It still says 25.
Paragraph 8.
Yeah, let me scroll
Under
back there.
alterations.
That's a good catch.
That was the only thing I saw.
Yeah, I think for the benefit of the Kalispell Golf Association, they'd want it changed for clarity within there. Because that does definitely, that'd be something we'd definitely change. Yep, as it comes forward with the final recommendation.
Mr. Nunley?
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a question, I'm pretty sure it's nowhere near it, but on that north end where we were talking in the move transportation plan of Grandview extending to Evergreen someday, that's far enough north that would not impact the north end of the golf course in any way.
Yeah, I'm just trying to situate it. I think that'd be a little bit further north.
Further north, okay.
We'd be looking at.
That's what I was thinking. I just wanted to clarify.
Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, John. What's the maintenance that is being done on infrastructure that kind of negates the lease payments?
Well, it was kind of very nebulously written initially, and I was just talking with Steve beforehand, and there were a lot of questions trying to really redefine that. You know, what are the city assets versus what are the assets that were identified being there? But, you know, basically what we looked at is, you know, if it wasn't a golf course, and this is only from the city's perspective, there were differences of opinions, and I want to recognize those. That's what led to the ultimate MOU that kind of satisfied everyone's interest for that. But from the city's perspective, we looked at it, okay, what city assets would we still use, be part of the city if we did not have it as a golf course? You know, the clubhouse certainly would be put to use with the kitchen and that availability. Parking lot structure in there. There were some potential sheds related to it, but that's kind of how we.
But it's
tried to
all stuff
separate-
they're using currently with the operation of the
Yes.
golf course. Yeah.
Yes, stuff that they're using, but would still be of value for really kind of any other municipal purpose. Or
Except we're not using it. I mean, I guess my objection, I have a number of objections with this, but starting with the fact that I feel like they're using this infrastructure, the cost should be on them, and the fact that we have a property that's 200-something acres of city property that's being used for, sport where people are paying a lot of money for a very exclusive sport, and we don't get any money from it at all because they're maintaining infrastructure that they benefit from and are using for 20, 30 years at a time, likely being extended, I think is pretty wild. I mean, when I first saw that 2014 MOU, when I came on council and asked about this, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it, that we have this operation on this size of city parcel and they don't pay anything to us. That is an incredible giveaway in my opinion. I think if we move forward with this, there should be a market rate for leasing city land that they pay, and they're on the hook for the cost of maintaining the infrastructure that they use and benefit from for decades. So that's one point. The other question I had is if the trail went in and there's, adjustment to the course, do we have any estimate what the cost of that would be?
It'd be dependent upon placement.
Yeah. I mean, that's another one where I feel like it's city property. And I understand the desire and makes sense to, if the golf course were to be there, to site the trail in a way that minimizes impacts to their operations. But ultimately, it's city property. We should be able to put a trail there if we want to. And if it affects their operations, they're on the hook for that cost to make that adjustment, not the city. It's city property. So I don't see why we should be paying them to utilize city property for a purpose that has tremendous public benefit. And then the third objection is really just the whole idea of this. What I find really offensive is that there is a fence around the golf course that's topped with barbed wire. And this is public land. And is to keep the public out for 5 to 6 months out of the year so that you can operate an exclusive and expensive club that for a sport that very few people actually play. When we have a golf course that's just up the road from here. So I actually don't see any purpose of having a golf course there at all. I'd rather be a public park. It'd be an amazing public park. It'd be a gem for the city to have 200 acres public park that we could use for festivals, concerts. It would connect Lawrence Park. You could go up there. You could have multitudes of paths going up the hill through there. It would be a tremendous benefit to the city. that I don't see we're getting from another golf course that very few people use, is expensive, and is exclusive. So I'm not inclined to support this at all.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say on there is that there's more history than just a snapshot in time. Municipal golf courses are nothing unusual in the realm of municipal government. You know, I've been a part of two others, and quite honestly, to have a independent management organization do it where it doesn't cost directly funding out is a nice scenario and situation that we benefit from this. Some of that property has components that has been donated to it because it's a golf course. And I'd have to go back and look at it, but I think some of it's deed restricted. I'm looking over to Steve at it. So it's not just all of a sudden you get all this back. So that there's reasons that it's there. In fact, I think the initial donation was related to it. That's why you have a multiple use agreement, is that there is more to it than just that's being public property. It's under the city's name, but there are components related to why it was provided. But, you know, it's similar to some components of amenities that I can go down the list that traditionally cost municipalities money. Airports, swimming pools, golf courses. Those are components that are not unusual that they cost municipalities money to operate for the same type of clientele that would be there and have been provided historically, and they evolve over that time. So when I say, you know, really what we're looking at is the extension of this agreement. The agreement from historical components is a pretty good arrangement from that perspective of looking at it in that some of their scenarios.
Can I follow up on that comment? You said the donation was tied. So I'm not familiar with that history. It was donated with the purpose of providing a golf course?
Yeah, I believe some of the land is under a deed restriction for it to be used for that purpose of a golf course. And it may be the Cameron 9. I'd have to pull them back up because never delved into those, but I think there was some deed restriction on some of that property.
I'd be interested in knowing the history and maybe seeing a map and getting a feel for understanding that history, because that would be helpful. You know, in terms of costs, I still think it's crazy that we don't get any money for use of this massive piece of public property. But, you know, I think if we had been charging lease and getting money, we could put that in an escrow, and building that fund to help pay those costs if we were to ever decide to do away with the golf course and have this public land. But we don't have that option since 2014 because we're not receiving any money. We're not receiving a dime from it, which is crazy. So,
Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Your Honor. I guess I'd just point out that the Kalispell City Airport, it's got a fence around it. It's a pretty exclusive use. I don't have a plane. I don't know how to fly a plane. You know, it brings in, you know, some money to the city of Kalispell. I believe that the golf course brings in resources to the city of Kalispell when tourists are using it, they're coming, they're staying here. So it's not a complete, you know, it's not a drain on the city of Kalispell and everything. We receive benefit from having a municipal golf course. And I kind of wonder, as it pertains to the city airport, I know that these agreements are different, but they kind of seem, on top level, they kind of seem like they operate the same.
Yeah, when you look at basically a private association
Right.
taking all responsibility and management, it's very much similar to the airport and the golf course. But you also have kid sports, which has restrictions on who can use it as well. And that has limitations built into it. So again, the types of amenities are not necessarily a different thing. But even with kid sports, we provide the maintenance of it all. So there's even a cost related to us, yet it's managed by a different association that has restrictions on who can use it, how can it be scheduled. So it's not unusual to have arrangements.
And I remember that was the benefit when we had the discussion about the city airport, was that the benefit was that they were taking on the management of it, you know, for that agreement. So
do we receive any money from the airport?
No.
Probably disagree with that too.
But again, the thing I'd say is it also costs us less now because of that arrangement.
You're off the hook.
Yeah, but they're using the facilities. I mean, that, you know, we shouldn't have to pay for facilities that they're using for long-term.
Mr. Dowd?
Have we ever historically looked at selling this?
No, not that I am aware of.
Thank you, Your Honor. We all know that I am an avid golfer and a member at Buffalo Hill, so I will have to recuse myself, I'm sure, when I vote or when we vote on this. But I just want to say, a few weeks ago, the golf course hosted the Governor's Cup 2-day tournament. Hundreds of golfers came from all over the state. I would like to ask Diane Medler at the Chamber, how many hotel stays were from that tournament, how much the economy, restaurants, everything. If that tournament was not here, you know, they would not have the hotel stays that we see every summer. The Labor Day tournament is coming up this next weekend. Again, hundreds of golfers come from all over and they stay in our hotels, they eat in our restaurants. And if you can't say that that's a benefit to the city, I don't know what is. So that's my piece. Thank you for listening.
Any other questions? Discussion? I think, you know, the only thing I think, Mr. Russell, is I look at the lease, trying to lay that groundwork because I'm not going to be here forever, thank God. It may make sense to get some of this history from some of the people while they're still around, incorporated into the lease agreement. Maybe some whereas, this property was donated, there's a deed restriction here. Because the last thing I want to see is we move forward 30 years from now or whatever happens, yet another council has no clue what happened or how the city was built. And then start making decisions that end up costing legal fees or just being not with the intent of the original donors. I think it would be help to solidify that information within here so we understand. Because, you know, Mr. Hunter, you're at a loss for what the background was. Mm-hmm. I learned the background in 2014 when we did the amendment. But it's you know, it's not uncommon with, especially across all the cities in Montana where there's municipal golf courses. The key is, what we look at is how do we protect the taxpayers so the taxpayer isn't then subsidizing through a lease agreement with operating costs where maybe the golf course loses money and they've got a big maintenance item, a bridge replacement, something that we looked at a few years ago, that then costs the taxpayers who don't use it, who don't golf, and then we start questioning those benefits. So really, I think it'd be good to incorporate a historical perspective, as I say, while there's still people around who remember before it's gone.
It actually kind of brings into my mind that when this does come up before council, that if we could have maybe a presentation even of what is that usage from the golf course, because I know that they do a lot and there is a benefit, right? Just even from community health aspect, right, of getting folks out. I've got a past board member of the fairgrounds that lives right there as a member, and he's out there walking it all the time, and I am positive that is what keeps him young. Mm-hmm. Right, so I see that there is other benefits, maybe if when it comes back up before city council for the signature, that we could have some kind of report back.
Well, and I think maybe, you know, to that point, you know, it's not just open to golfers. It's open to other activities. Well, like you said, walking, but I think it's also in the winter cross-country skiing. You can do that there. So I mean, that's a good physical activity as well. So it's not as exclusive as what exclusive might be. I mean, it's open for people
open
to
in the
use.
wintertime.
For people to use.
In wintertime, yeah.
It's not like the Bushwood Country Club. Go ahead, Ms. Gabriel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hunter, I had some of your questions as well, because this has come up more than twice since I've been on, and Mr. Dunphy was able to talk about the different uses of the golf course, and I know people cross-country ski in there, and they walk and they jog, but because of the turf, they can't have that during golf season. So that was an education for me, because I didn't understand, how much the turf had to be manicured and babied for golfers. It just does. And they've been, I think, an incredible neighbor and benefit. So all the people that live around the golf course certainly benefit in the resale of their homes and by having a good neighbor. And I kind of look at it, and I don't golf, so I'm not being paid for my comments. But I do appreciate the beautiful golf course there, and that folks can go do their golfing and do it within the city. But I kind of look at it similarly to, I used to ski, downhill ski, and I can't anymore. But the Big Mountain User Group, and that corporation rents that land to use for skiing, but it gets shut down when they can't use it anymore, and then anybody can go use it. But for the period of time where they're using it, we're not allowed to go up and ski without buying a pass. So I think the precedent has been set for this, and I think it's a wonderful city asset, and I would encourage us to move ahead and approve this. Thank you.
Other questions, discussion? General consensus, move?
Yep,
I mean,
yep, I mean, we'll work on it, and, it may be, a few meetings from now when we get some of this information put together, but we can try and incorporate some of that stuff and get the story, and I'll work with KGA, and, as they, I'm sure, have all sorts of data and history about events and activities that they can provide as well, and we'll just put it on a regular agenda once we get to that point and have it ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Any comments on this item before we move along, Mr. Dunphy, or you good? Okay. Lead line replacement costs, Mr. Russell.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, really providing an update and kind of some, really the new rulemaking that's coming out that we anticipate and what that means, really kind of an update on previous discussions, but able to have a little bit longer of a timeline and kind of provide some of the financial components related to it, and maybe a little bit of direction from the council in terms of what initial thoughts are in terms of the replacement program. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Director of Public Works, Suzie Turner, to do the staff report.
Good evening, Your Honor, council members. One second, I'm gonna start over. Good evening, Your Honor and council members. In December of 2022, and then again in the spring of 2024, we presented on EPA changes that are happening with the lead and copper rule. Tonight, we are going to take we're going to do a quick refresher on those changes, provide a status on our current progress towards meeting compliance with the current rule, and go over some costs associated with the current rule and the proposed rule that is up for final adoption this October. As I explain things further tonight, it's really important to understand the history of the lead and copper rule. Pre-2021 was the original lead and copper rule, if you will. There may have been some minor iterations, but it was the rule that we operated under for many, many years. One could say that this is the rule before the Flint, Michigan scenario happened. As a response to that, in 2021, EPA published the lead and copper rule revision. Otherwise, we call it and shorten it the LCRR rule. And the LCRR rule is the current rule that we are operating under. Since the 2021 rule update, EPA has revisited and proposed new language known as the lead and copper rule improvement, so the LCRI. The LCRI is proposed and anticipated for final publication October of 2024. October 16th to be exact, if it happens. So this new update increases some of the regulatory requirements for lead service line replacements, and we'll get into a few more details as we go on tonight. All right. Drinking water rules, once adopted, typically have a compliance period. The compliance period allows public water supplies to implement requirements over certain timeframes. 2024 is a milestone in the current rule and is potentially the start of the compliance period for the proposed rule. Therefore, at this point, we're looking at compliance with both rules, not knowing exactly what's going to happen in the next couple of months. As such, I'm going to review briefly both rules so we can see what the differences are, and we kind of have some comparative of what we need to look forward in the next couple months and then the years beyond that time. So starting with the LCRR rule, the LCRR rule was adopted in 2021. I'm going to get my laser pointer. So the LCR rule was adopted in 2021. There was a 3-year compliance period to implement the compliance noted in 2024. So in 2024, we're required to complete an initial service line inventory and a lead service line replacement plan. That initial inventory is due October 16th of 2024. So we are currently working on populating that inventory requirement. The lead service line replacement, which is due, will probably get extended in the LCRI rule. If the LCRI rule does not get adopted, I do not know exactly how EPA is going to look at compliance of that at the same time. So we might be scrambling real quick to get that in place by the end of the year. This year, the current rule, the trigger levels for compliance is changed to 10 micrograms per liter. The older rule was 15. For comparison, Kalispell's lead is 2 micrograms per liter. So we are well under the compliance requirements for action levels with lead. The Tier 1 public notice becomes effective if the action level identified is exceeded. But again, we have been in the past well under that compliance level. We are required to begin service line notifications. And service line notifications comes with the understanding of your initial service line inventory. You're required to provide notice on if a customer's service line is lead or suspected lead. So there's certain requirements that we have to provide notification within 30 days of October 16th, depending on what your service line material type is. And then finally, as a part of that inventory, we will update our monitoring. And if the monitoring action if from that monitoring our action levels are exceeded, we have to find and fix, is what they called that for the lead service line replacements. I'm going to take that back. We have to find and potentially fix what those are. If our action levels are exceeded, we may have to do some school monitoring, but there is a compliance period with that school monitoring. The state has a pretty robust sampling program for schools already in place. So the DEQ has already kind of taken on some of that school sampling, but we may have to do additional sampling for non-registered schools and daycares, and or if a registered school requests sampling. So there's some compliance components with that. There is a component in there called risk mitigation for various disturbance. If for some reason a lead service line is replaced as a part of this LCRR rule, then the city is required to provide a filter pitcher, like the Brita filter that removes lead, for up to 6 months after the replacement is completed. And I want to make sure I covered everything. Oh, I think I just talked through everything here. Did I miss anything?
Not on the LCR.
All right. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the LCRI regulatory timeline. So as I noted before, in October of 2024, the initial service line inventory is due, same as the LCRR. And even before that, the final LCRI rule is supposed to be adopted, but I have not heard any word on whether that is actually going to happen or not. DEQ seems to think that it is going to happen, so that's all I really have to go on. Okay, so our initial service line inventories are due. Additionally, in October, your Tier 1 public notices come into effect, and your service line notifications also come into effect. So again, if we identify a lead service line, we have to notify that customer that they have a lead service line and go forward with those requirements. So if the LCRI rule is adopted, you have a 3-year compliance period again here to implement these compliance requirements. So they changed the name from initial service line inventory to baseline inventory. So you will continue to review your inventory and identify service lines. So you have an additional 3 years to kind of fine tune your inventory. There are potentially a lot of unknowns that are out there that you might not get to by October 2024. So you have a little bit of timeline to fine tune your inventory, and they call that your baseline inventory. You're also required to develop a sampling plan based off of what that inventory is, and then a lead service line replacement plan. Those are all due in 2027. There is a new action level of, it is the same action level that is under the current rule. It's 10 microns per liter. That becomes effective also. With the LCRI rule, there is a 10-year replacement schedule. So you are required to implement replacement schedules as a part of the LCRI rule. That's one of the main differences between the LCRR versus the LCRI is the LCRI requires replacement. And then we will get it on our last slide, we will review what that replacement looks like and how to fund those replacements on that. Again, with the LCRI rule, you do have distribution systems and site assessment. That comes with your monitoring. If you monitor and you establish certain lead service lines, you have so much time to replace that. And then you also have to do your risk mitigation. After they are replaced, you have to provide the filter picture and the replacement filters for up to 6 months. You also have your monitoring, your school monitoring that has to happen by 2032. So the same components, just shifted a little bit on your timeline with the LCRI. And then, because we have overlapping of rules, with the LCRR rule, as a part of your inventory, you're only required one single point of service line verification. So under our current rule, you only have to identify your service line material from one single point. In your LCRI rule, it requires 2 points of verification. So that's where the pothole comes into place, where we talked about potholing our service lines at the curb stop so we could have 2 points instead of 1 point of verification. Well, EPA came up with a validation process. So for all of the service lines that we identified with 1 point of verification, now they came up with a method to reduce that amount depending on how many you did. So for example, for the city of Kalispell, we believe we will have under 1,500 of the single point validations. So we will have to pothole about 300 of those service lines for validation, which is better than what we thought it was before. We thought we were going to have to do all of them, but so they came up with a validation process. It's random, so you randomize it, and then you go out and you have to pothole, you verify it. But again, we believe we're going to be under the 1,500. So for the city of Kalispell, it's going to be around 300 of those single point lines that we've identified. We'll have to go pothole for. So a little bit less than what I thought originally. So I think, that's a good thing that we recognized. And then as a part of this rule, finally, by 2037, we do have to identify all of our unknowns, and we do have to replace our lead service lines or our recognized lead service lines, which are galvanized required replacement lines. So you do have a 10-year compliance period for replacement starting from 2027. As a part of that requirement, you do have to replace at a 10% rate over a 3-year average. So you can't just wait till the end of the 10 years and replace them all. You do have to have 10% replacement rate as a part of that. Is there any questions on that? That is a lot of those rules.
Is the initial survey every line or a percentage of them?
It is every line.
Okay.
We have to identify the service line material for every service line, every fire line, and every irrigation line. So domestic, irrigation, and fire. And every line that's not used also. So if we, in our subdivisions, we have whips that come out, we have to identify those. But those actually are very easy to classify what they are.
And are you going to talk about funding later in the presentation?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? It's a lot. Okay. Got it? Okay. So as I noted earlier, initial inventory is really the first compliance mile marker, and that's applied for either rule. So whether it's the LCRR or the LCRI, it is the first compliance rule that we're working towards. The initial inventory has to be, your question led right into it, all service lines, and we have to identify everything upstream and downstream of the curb stop. So as we're categorizing everything, we do have to say whether it's upstream or downstream and what line material it is. We are required to report that to DEQ as lead, galvanized required replacement, non-lead, or unknowns. Those are the 4 main categories we get to place on the lines. So, what we've been doing is we've been doing quite a bit of a desktop inventory. So we take our city work histories that we know when we've worked on service line. When we're changing out meters, we're in the homes and we're identifying what the service lines are. We're looking at our construction drawings to identify what those service line materials are. City code, lead was banned. Lead use was banned in the 1970s. So everything after the 1970 that was built actually is a pretty low-hanging fruit. So we can classify those as non-lead. Also, the state of Montana adopted a plumbing code banning lead in 1988. So everything built after 1988 can also be classified as non-lead. So there's a big chunk that we were able to look at and say, okay, we know that these were built after the 1970s or 1988. So we were able to identify those as non-lead lines going forward. From there, we sent out a survey to residents in the spring. We sent out about 1,500 of them to the areas of town where we knew they were built before the 1970s, and we could not really identify what their service line materials are. We received about 250 responses back on that. That was a really quick survey. They just had to log into it, upload, or just identify what their service line was, provide a picture, because that's a verification process. And then it got uploaded into our GIS system and was cataloged. We also as a part of the city of Kalispell for many years, prior to like digital and electronic form record keeping, we kept tap cards. So they're just simply index cards with addresses of the taps. So we had a lot of really good background information, and we're still going through those tap cards. A lot of those tap cards are telling us what the service line material is, downstream and upstream. So very fortunate that we kept some pretty good records on a whole bunch of recipe cards that we're thumbing through. So we've made really good headway from those tap cards. From there, when we have a list of unknowns that we just can't identify what they are, we are sending our water crew out to knock on doors. We go in groups of 2. We knock on a door. We have a letter. We try to get inside the house to physically identify what the service lines are. So that's been mildly successful, but we are currently focusing on 382 of those downstream unknowns. So your downstream unknowns are in your house. So we've got 382 left to really try to get into people's residence to identify what those service line materials are. To date, we've collected and we know at least 10,000 service lines, so we know what they are. We've got, can't really see that, sorry. 382 downstream service lines remaining to identify, and we have 234 upstream service lines to identify. So we've made a really good push here. And when I say me, I actually mean our water division, our water superintendent, our water supervisors, and our water crew have really made a really strong effort to be able to get this inventory completed by October 16th. So pretty good push here in the last couple months.
Hey, Susie,
Yep.
I have a question. If we're talking about the customer-owned service line, looks like it comes all the way from the water main
Yes.
up to the house. So then you get to the house, and if we're talking about these houses prior to, what'd you say, 78?
1970s and then 1988 are really your two trigger dates. Yeah.
The plumbing inside the house, I'm just trying to figure out, as a city, we're going and replacing the line from the water main to the house, and that, I mean, I know you're going to get to this as far as how it's funded and everything, but if you get to the house and the house has lead or copper inside the house, are you doing anything? Are you
Well-
improving anything really? Because it's still running through the house, and I'm not going through and suggesting that that what we're talking about going in and replacing everything inside the house too. So I'm trying to figure out, what are we trying to do here? EPA, if the plumbing inside the house is still carrying that type of plumbing.
I've never seen lead inside of internal building plumbing in Kalispell. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but it would be very atypical
What about
to
copper?
see. Say that again.
Well, copper.
Copper, but copper is somewhat exempt from either the LCRR or the LCRI.
Okay.
The galvanized could kind of lead into what your question is, because if we find that lead was in the street but galvanized is in the home side of the curb stop, that galvanized would require replacement under either of the rules. So what you're kind of alluding to is, wouldn't they naturally want to replace the galvanized inside of the home too? Yes, but that's not covered underneath the rule.
Essentially, there are limits to EPA's authority and what they
Right.
can require. Their ultimate goal is zero lead in the water system and the water supply system. And EPA, under these new rules, identified service lines as a part of the water system, even though throughout America, service lines are actually customer-owned, as in the city of Kalispell. All of our service lines are customer-owned service
So
lines.
could there also a case be made that the least amount of distance or the least amount of time water is spent going through a copper line or water line, let's just say galvanized or lead, the least amount of time that it's going through it, it still is going to be beneficial?
Well, the removal of a leaded service line is ultimately going to be beneficial
Right.
because it does carry lead through the service line into the resident or into the customer's place of business. So ultimately, it is going to reduce the amount of lead going in if there is a lead service line. But it won't do anything for if there is leaded lines in the house. There's just, that's where the line is drawn. But as a resident or somebody who owns an older house, it might be beneficial for them to understand what their plumbing is made of. I mean, I think that's a great question to put out there is, lead definitely has some health effects with it. So it's not a bad question to ask for the older homes in Kalispell as a part of that. So, as Joe was kind of alluding to, we do have certain classifications. So obviously a leaded service line, galvanized required replacement. That is when you have a galvanized section that is downstream of what might have been a lead line. If we can't identify that this section maybe upstream was not lead, then it has to be categorized as a galvanized required replacement. So really trying hard to understand what the both material categorizations were and are. So it's very important. And then, of course, you have your non-leads and your unknowns, which over the next several years, we will get down to those unknowns. For us, the unknown should be 0 by 2027. And we think we'll get to that much faster also. So as I talked through in the previous slide, under the LCRR rule, since in the city of Kalispell, the service line is under one ownership. The customer owns the service line. 1 point of visual inspection is okay. So we can focus on trying to figure out what it is in the homes. And that's what we're doing for that. However, under the LCRI rule, you need 2 points of verification. And as I explained a little bit earlier, there is a validation process. So we will need to go out and pothole approximately 300 service lines around the curb stop to identify and verify that our process is correct. So that has to happen and be completed by 2034. So that's when we have to complete that process by. Okay, any questions on where we're at?
And I know we talked about this earlier. If somebody doesn't want you in their home, and I'm sure you've probably had some that just don't want you in their home already. Living where we live, I can only imagine that. Well, when you go do potholing, and I think we've talked about this, I think Sid brought it up before, and they don't want you on the property, do we just then say it's probably lead and we're not going to be able to replace it?
You know, it's going to be a process of those unknowns that we have. If we don't get into people's house, the fact of the matter is, because of the way our water regs are written, and they're a customer of the city of Kalispell, we are able to get in people's houses because what we do have an enforcement mechanism,
Right.
if you will, where we can tag and shut people off if they don't let us in their house. So we could use that process, or we could wait and try to pothole also, to not have to get into somebody's house. But if there's a meter in somebody's house and we have to get in and do a meter, we do have a right to go in and look at the system and the meter,
Sure.
as a part of that. So we do have some mechanisms to help, get the information we need. Obviously, we don't want to force our way into people's houses. So we would try to educate the best we can as to why we need to get in there.
I don't envy the frontline folks that have to go to that ulterior motive of
Yeah.
getting to that point. It's,
You know, if we have a real difficult situation, then yeah, we would just pothole it and maybe put in a meter pit. You know, so again, we have some options that we would institute at the times, just depending on that.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, and it looks like I didn't update. My numbers don't match. So this should have actually been 382 and 234 on these. We are constantly updating the information, and as of just this afternoon, these are the new numbers. So I should have updated this slide. I apologize. What I wanted to do real quick was to actually highlight how we're keeping track of all these records. So we actually have a really robust GIS system where all of our information is stored on our GIS database. We have an inventory of the addresses, the line types, when they were built. So we've built a very robust database utilizing our GIS system. As our water crews are going through those tap lines, they're down at their desk with iPads, and they're just inputting information that gets automatically uploaded into our GIS database. As they're out in the field and they're doing surveys themselves, they're logging into our GIS system, taking a picture, and it's automatically uploading. So we have a really good GIS system that helps us track all the data that we're accumulating and populating on a daily basis. So we have all that information, and this is kind of just a little snapshot of what it looks like on a desktop. So when you're looking on a snapshot one more time in there, the blue is a service line that are known. The orange are the lead service lines that we've identified. And then we have other colors for unknown upstream, unknown downstream. And then, like I said before, blue is a known. So this kind of gives you that visual representation when you're looking at a map of what those inventories are. We're super fortunate to have a great GIS coordinator, and she takes all that information and she then will manipulate the information through equations and code, and she transforms that into an Excel spreadsheet. DEQ has a standard Excel spreadsheet that has to be filled out exactly and uploaded then to their database by October 16th. So she takes all of our information, manipulates it, and brings it into that standard form so we can submit it. And we're talking over 10,000 points of data as we're going through. So it's pretty fantastic what our GIS system is capable of doing, and our employees that are able to help us through all that.
I just want to follow up on something I mentioned before, but for the folks that we've identified the lead, have they been notified that they have lead?
They will be. So the inventory is due October 16th, and we have 30 days to then provide them that information. We are still working on gathering all that information. So as you see identified here, we have 41 lead lines that we've identified in the city of Kalispell. We want to still go back and verify exactly what those lead lines are. So we're going to go back and do a double check on the tapping card, because a lot of these are in the older section of town. But some of the lead identified lines were identified by residents and in an area of town that didn't make a lot of sense that it was a lead line. So we still got to go back and do some QA/QC internally before we start sending out letters to everybody. But that's a part of that service line inventory public notice. So we are required to, and we will be getting a lot of information pushed out after October 16th. And then, you know, it's a dynamic inventory. So again, just kind of like I explained, we're still working through it until we get to that final. Our ultimate goal is to have every service line upstream and downstream identified, and have 0 unknowns. And the compliance date for that is 2027. So we do have a little bit of time, a little bit of breathing room to get all that done. So. Okay, so this slide is both informational, and then I'll be asking for a little bit of guidance from council on the funding mechanisms. On the left-hand column are the action items. On the right-hand column are the funding options. As we look at the action items, we really have 2 action items that we need to do that's going to cost money. The first one is our inventory validation. Kind of explained that a couple times. Again, we think it's going to be around 300 service lines that we're going to have to pothole. So the city can perform that action. And if the city performs that action, we've got 10 years compliance to actually do that. And we would just take it on a little bit at a time and perform that potholing internally. I do think that is an action that could be absorbed by the city staff and our current equipment, knowing that we have that 10-year timeline to do that. So I do believe that we can perform that and maintain compliance. However, we do have the option to have that be funded through an SRF loan program. If that were the case, then the city would take out a loan. For the potholing, we'd have to procure a contractor, and the cost that we would incur, 60% of that would be forgiven, and 40% of that would occur debt at a 1.5% interest rate. So it's actually a very good loan for the city through the SRF program.
Is there a different speed in which this would be implemented, depending on which one we do?
If we were to procure a contractor, I would imagine that we would probably get it done much faster. Yeah. I wouldn't probably span it over 5-10 years. I'd try to get it done 2-3, or even quicker. Yeah. But again, this is a validation process. So we've identified what we think the line is at a single point, and we're just validating with the 2-point verification process. So this is just simply validation. Still costs that we have to incur to get it done.
What's the cost for potholing?
It was, the last estimate we had from a contractor was about $700 per service line.
It's less than I would have guessed.
Yeah.
Okay. So the second action item that we are required to do under the LCRI rule, now we're assuming the LCRI rule is going to be adopted, and I have no reason to think that it won't be. So replacement of lead service lines and galvanized required replacements would be required within 10 years of 2027. So we have several options on how that can be funded. We can have the SRF program fund the full replacement of that service line. And again, we do have an opportunity to use the SRF loan, whereas 60% of that full cost would be forgiven and 40% of that would be debt at a 1.5% interest rate. The caveat to incurring or utilizing the SRF loan program is the water fund as a whole has to pay back the loan. You can't put that cost onto an individual property owner for replacement. The second option is to have the customer pay for the cost, since it is the customer's service line. And typically, as a part, if a customer needed to replace their service line, they would bear that full cost to replace the service line. So this is where it gets a little bit different from the city's policies and rules and regulations. It is a customer-owned service line. So if the city, as a part of policy, wanted to maintain, the customer would have to pay for the cost to replace that service line. We could institute a program where the city could pay up front and have deferred payments, or we could just have the customer pay all at once, and we could facilitate the program. So there could be some give and take as to how much involvement you would like staff to be involved as a part of this program. Ultimately, we would have to set in place some process to ensure the lines get replaced. So you still have to ensure the lines are getting replaced. It's just how you do that is up to the cities. So,
Thank you.
Right?
yep. So those are kind of my two options that I would recommend us kind of talk through, and happy to get any directions or other options as suggested by council.
I guess I'm inclined to, I look at this a little bit of these lead lines went in, if we think of society collectively as kind of saying the stuff's safe, this is what we're using to deliver your water, and people trusted it, and that's what was put in. And so society collectively kind of has a responsibility to address the fact that it turns out the stuff's really toxic and can really harm your kids. And so I would lean towards putting it more towards water fund rather than individual customers. I think the loan, if I understand you correctly, going the loan route, that results in a faster process than if it were absorbed over a 10-year program. Is that kind of what you were saying? That it was be more like a 3-year process or something at the loan route?
For the inventory validation, I think we would get it done in faster if we were to bring on a contractor to support us, and we utilize the SRF funding for that. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's just, remember, that's for the validation process. That's just to validate, and we actually have a 10-year period to get that done. So a little bit different. But to your point, if we were to utilize the SRF funding, we would get the replacements done and at a faster speed, I anticipate, than going through and having it done customer by customer, or having the customer pay for it. So
You would expect that to be faster.
huh?
Yeah, you would expect that. Why would that be faster?
I think the SRF program would be faster. Just like you said,
So not the customer funding.
not the customer
Would
funding.
be-
I
would
think
be
it
slower.
would take us,
Yeah.
it would take a little longer to do that, yeah.
So I'm inclined to go with the faster route, given that there's a real health concern here. So moving faster, and given that the loan terms are so favorable, I am curious with the interest rate, if, given the cost of this, what are we looking about at kind of added cost with those interest rates versus if we were to do it ourselves? Do we have any kind of idea what difference that would be in cost to the city?
I do, when I do some cost estimates, looking at the number of lines that we have right now, I identified, knowing that it's probably going to be a little bit reduced from this number, I'm going to say. So we think we have just a little over 100 service lines that need to be replaced in the city. Whether that is upstream, downstream, or upstream and downstream. So you kind of have all different types of categories. We estimate it's going to cost about $2.6 million to do it, to replace all those service lines. That would be the total cost. So 60 of that would be forgiven, so you would be paying on a loan. So 40% would be at a 1.5% interest rate, so that it totals to about $1.2 million that would come out of the city's water fund to support lead service line replacements.
But the interest rate versus, because the
That-
cost is still there if we didn't
that-
go with a loan.
Yeah, that included the interest rate. So in total, $1.2 million will come out of the water fund to replace a little over 100 service lines.
So,
And that estimate, just to, it's really difficult to know how much it's gonna cost to replace a line from the street side to the curb stop, from the curb stop to the house and into the house. So, we're estimating it's gonna cost about $20,000 a line to replace that. But if we have to remove a patio or a tree or a deck, it's really hard to know exactly what those costs are gonna be. Some could be higher, some could be lower. Just hard to know until we start to really dive into it.
and that debt we pay off over what time frame?
20 years.
20 years. Yeah.
Just in time for the testing to come up that what we're replacing lead with is no good.
I hope not.
Rondo's good, it's got electrolytes. Stop it.
Yeah, I think given those terms, I'd probably be inclined towards the loan.
Mr. Graham?
Yeah, I'd agree with Ryan. The fact of the matter is, you have individuals that are, living in these residences that have no idea that this is going to be a problem. If you're going through and looking at it as a customer, putting this on the customer, I would dare say it's not something they've put in their budget. And that's a pretty big hit to take when you're going to get that in the mail, that you're going to owe, I think you said up to $20,000 to replace this. So even doing the deferred payments for 5 to 10 years, and a lot of times people have bought these houses and moved into them, 30 years ago or something, and it's not their fault. So I think the terms of the loan are good. To me, I think that's the only way I see it going, in my mind. I don't like the loan. I don't like borrowing the money and stuff like that, but I can't go through and say that the customer has to go through and bear the cost of this.
Well, either the specific customer this affects pays the cost, or we all do, right? It's, the cost is still there. Now, it's a very small amount over a long period of time, which might be more palatable, but I don't want to lose track of, this isn't free money. We're paying it back with general fund, with water fund, which comes out of the general fund, right?
No.
So specifically raised through the whole water rate
Your water
schedule?
rates, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I just question, so, Mr. Dowd, we go dig around in Ryan's house, we find zonalite. Oh, causes cancer. Don't worry, we'll all cover the cost for you, Ryan. And that lead-based paint. It's what I'm looking at is what are the precedent that's also been set? Because the other side of this is, well, we found the house and Chad built the house and didn't put the tie downs in like he should have. It's not fair. The person didn't know that. I mean, I understand trying to make it palatable, but I also come back to kind of like the discussion we had on garbage. User pay. And I, it's kind of cutthroat, but then again, I also go, is it, there's a lot of things that are cost of society. So before we just jump and run and say, do this, I'm not ready to say one way or the other right now and give you direction, Susie.
Yeah, I just like to see what it looks like.
Yeah.
What would, any estimate in terms of the impact on rates to cover that?
We are to the point where we need to do the loan application. I have applied and we are on the priority list. So this is special monies that is actually held for lead service line replacements. So the money, this loan offer actually goes away, I believe, next year. So unless we capitalize on the loan the lead service line SRF program for lead replacements. Eventually, this offer, if you will go away. And we could use a typical SRF loan, but we won't get the forgiveness that you see with this lead
But yeah,
portion.
but we're not looking at, this is a timeshare thing, take it now or forever lost. We could like think about it for a week and give you.
Yes, Your Honor, you
Okay, thank you.
absolutely can. I haven't done the calculation to see if we need to increase rates because of it.
I
So
would-
that comes when I do the full application.
decline
And then I would, if I did think it needed to increase rates, then I would definitely be back in front of council to review that as a part of it.
But just the instinct of what I'm hearing, the impression I'm getting is the impact on rates would be fairly insignificant.
Kind of
So,
like cutting impact fees, pretty easy.
yeah. And difference between developers, who are making a profit off of development versus a homeowner who has no knowledge of their health impacts from a lead
It's
line.
not the
But
developer losing the profit, Mr. Hunter, it's the cost of the end unit.
I get that. We
So
won't go back
stop
through
with the
that
narrative that it's
debate.
always the evil developer getting the best over everybody and those evil golfers.
Yeah, it gets passed on to the buyer of a brand new development, which is always going to sell at a premium. But but I think about, fairly small impact on rates, if at all, really. And but 100 individuals who get hit with a bill of 20,000. To me, it's pretty clear which way you go on that, but.
I'm chuckling to myself because I think lead-based paint was a food group for me when I was a kid. Having trouble figuring
Pretty
out.
much guarantee it was, Mr. Dowd.
Is that what happened?
I think a little more information
What type
would
of
be good, just
information?
on what would be the impact on rates, just based on what we know today. I mean, I still wrestle with
Okay.
that, but I think it would be good to have a little more information, just to go eyes wide open into this.
I can tell you from some real brief calculations, the payment for if we needed to take out a loan for a little over $1 million, our payments would be $62,000 a year as a part of that. So that's kind of my back of the napkin, assuming that our total replacement costs are around $2.3 million. 60 of that is forgiven, 40 of that goes to debt. So, but I can come back with a little more substantial numbers and also look at the water fund as a whole, because we do have some other large loans that we are with the lower zone tanks. So we are looking at, having SRF funding for that also, with not a lot of forgiveness for those tank replacements. So it is definitely a action item I was going to do anyway. So I can come back with better information for council.
In typical, upper division government, we'll give you this great loan, but everyone pays. We can't give you the great loan and just those affected have to pay.
Yeah,
That
I
would make
tried.
too much common sense, so.
So if there is on the customer side, if they were paying, the city fronts the money, and then it's I guess it says 8-year deferred payback. Is there an interest rate on that?
Typically, when the
payback?
city, actually, ultimately be up to council policy if they wanted to have an interest rate applied to that. With the 50/50 program, which is kind of related, it's very similar to the 50/50 program where you could have deferred payments if you wanted to. I think we have I can't remember if it's a 5 or 6% interest rate on it. So there is, we could apply an interest rate and based off of what we do with the 50/50, it's a 5 or 6%. I just can't remember this.
So then they'd effectively be getting a better loan through that route if it were to correct? If we're being fronted by the city, am I reading that right?
I'm not sure I follow you. If
Well,
you're
it
saying
says
that
the city would manage and front the money, and it would be an 8-year deferred payback. Under the customer can pay directly for the cost, the city manage and front the money would be an 8-year deferred payback.
And more.
Yeah, and typically, if, well, like we do with the 50/50 program, when we have a deferred payback, there is an interest rate associated with that payback. And that comes directly to the city then for paying that back. But I don't know comparative if it's a better loan as compared to what?
And that,
I'm just looking at the interest rates.
Oh, okay, no, interest rates in general,
Yeah.
gotcha, okay.
and that payback is through the rates. So we would up their water rates to adjust for what the individual.
How we
homeowner-
would administrate that, I would just have to figure out, we could do it through the utility billing process or on, as a part of their taxes. So I would just have to work through exactly what that means.
Because I'm just trying to walk through that household that's living on a fixed income that can't afford it. And what happens, they can't make payment. Do they get their water shut off because they can't afford to replace their lead lines that they had no responsibility for?
There's potential of that
That
scenario.
seems pretty cruel to me.
But-
It's interesting, just the change in times. I remember 1980, 81, somewhere in there. Somehow, my brothers and I, we survived a house with a lead service line. It was discovered. Wow, we dug it up and replaced it. And didn't look to anybody. It was just, wow, it's our house, we're gonna do this. Changing times. Kind of interesting. Look to the whole to solve our problems, which I find interesting.
I guess to that point too, the city does not have to be involved in the construction of the replacement line either. I mean, a customer could choose to just do it themselves too. So they could get their own contractor or they could do it themselves. They would have to get a right-of-way permit when they're working in the right-of-way. So there's some things we'd have to facilitate and work through, but that could be an option for this.
Yeah.
It would be.
If you did it yourself, you wouldn't be,
You wouldn't be included in having your rates adjusted to pay
well,
that
no,
back?
if you did it yourself,
That's what I'm
no, exactly, that's what I'm saying, you throw it all on rates, why would anyone take care of their own property?
Right.
Shit, quit mowing my lawn. Parks Department can do it. Go ahead, Miss Gabriel, sorry, I'm just in one of those moods today,
I can tell.
too much news.
Susie, I think I know the answer. I kind of side asked Mark on that, but if we were to apply for that loan, be approved, could we not accept it should council decide not to go that direction? So you're not having to apply at the 11th hour?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, it's a reimbursable loan, so you have to, you only have to pay debt on what you incurred. So
Okay.
yes, I could move forward with the application.
All right, thank you.
Other discussion, more time to think versus what? Okay, I mean, given, like a little bit of time to think through this. Okay. All right, 3 Mile Drive speed study discussion.
Yeah, Mayor and Council. At our last meeting, you heard a presentation from Montana Department of Transportation on a corridor study for speed along 3 Mile, then going north. At the conclusion of that, they had asked if council has any comments to submit them, and they sought to submit them collaboratively as a governing body. As such, we scheduled tonight in case there were any comments that the council wanted to provide related to that speed study. So with that, I will leave it up for council discussion. And if there's any comments, and if not, we don't need to provide any. So it's wherever council would like to go with it.
Mr. Dowd.
Just as a refresher from that very number intensive and stat intensive, presentation we got. Basically, what came out at the end of that was there was no recommendation to alter the speeds through any of those zones. So that's That was the ultimate,
Except for,
End of that.
except for the
Except for
school.
out-
If there's a
Extending the
school zone.
schools.
Yeah,
okay.
To extend the school.
but within the city where we have subdivisions, no.
Right.
Just wanted to make clear that that was the end result.
Mr. Hunter?
Yeah, thank you. So I've read a fair amount of criticism about the way that traffic engineers set speed on roads, and I hope that the approach is changing. But we saw in the presentation, I think the traditional way of doing this, that's getting a fair amount of critique, which is basically building a road that has, very safe for, or they think it's very safe for higher speeds, lots of space and sight lines and everything else. And then people drive it fast because they feel comfortable driving it fast. And then they clock it, and then they take the 85 percentile and set the speed at that. There's kind of a different approach that is being pushed more now, which is thinking about what is a safe speed? What is a safe speed for pedestrians using, the road and crossing the street? What is a safe speed for if there is a collision, for vehicles and people's safety? What's a good speed for building community and having a street that fits with the neighborhood and is a nice street? Setting that as the speed limit, and then designing the road to have features that encourage drivers to drive at that speed. And so I see that kind of in play here at 3 Mile. I've mentioned in the past, I used to go out there and go up Stillwater, and I'd have to come out on Stillwater, and sometimes I was coming out during the kind of rush hour traffic. And when there's a lot of cars on there, the speed they're going at, there's nothing breaking up that traffic. It's hard, you want to get out into traffic, you're really gunning it to make sure you have enough speed that nobody's coming up on your tail. And that's me in a vehicle driving. And I can't imagine if there's kids who live in the neighborhoods to the north, who have a buddy, a friend who live in the neighborhoods in the south, they want to cross that street. There's no crosswalk. There's no feature to slow cars down or to tell them a pedestrian is wanting to cross, a kid on a bike. So I don't, the idea that the road is good the way it is and the speeds are good the way they are, I disagree with strongly. I think in the city limits, I don't think any road should have a speed limit above 35 miles per hour other than the bypass, which is designed for, kind of high speeds and limited access. And then when roads are getting into neighborhoods, probably shouldn't have them above 25 miles per hour. So what I'd rather see is lowering the speed limits as it comes into town, comes into the developments there, as it comes around the corner and stuff. And then implement some of the design features of traffic calming to make sure that vehicles are slowing down and also breaking up that traffic. Whether it's more traffic lights out there or something that breaks up that traffic so people can get out and there can be an opportunity for somebody to cross the street if they want to. But I find it really interesting that DOT was on the plan for our Safe Streets downtown plan that we just approved. And then they're also on this plan, and they're polar opposites in terms of how you approach street safety and road design and everything else. I want to move more towards the Safe Streets downtown plan and move away from kind of this traditional approach, which we saw with 3 Mile study.
So you're also including 93 for 35? That's what you would like to see is.
Yeah, I've spoken about that, like north of Reserve. Ultimately, it's very different from what we have now. It would take a long time to kind of move in that direction. 93 south, 93 north. I envision for that more of an urban boulevard.
I'm kind of talking about from, like the Buffalo Hill Golf Course north to Reserve, because that's 45 there.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Slowing that down. Yeah.
I don't agree with that.
I seem to remember me whining about a couple years ago about the inability of council to be able to set speed limits on streets. It went to some kind of Montana regulation that automatically just happened. Is that only for initially setting a speed limit, or does that just we just have to take whatever the Montana code says about it? Do you recall what I'm talking about?
I don't remember the specifics, but you could be talking about roads that are on the federal system.
No, these are speed limits within town. We used to have to, like, if there was a new street, the police chief and fire chief would be involved in a recommendation for the speed of that street. And then the council would vote on it, and they could change it. But with this new process, we are unable to modify whatever that type of street speed is supposed to be set at. Does that ring a bell?
Just on the federal program, isn't it, Susie?
It does apply to urban state routes also. So there are different types of requirements for setting speed depending on what category the road network is labeled as. So if it's a state secondary, if it's state urban route, the state has jurisdiction over setting those speeds, and it has to go before the Transportation Commission. And there is Montana code that only allows you to lower it to a certain level or by a certain percentage. And I'd have to go refresh myself on that code also, but I can do that and bring it back to everybody. But to your point, there's definitely layers of requirements for roads. Even if it is a local road, if it's a state urban route, the state has jurisdiction over speed limit designations. If you recall, we tried to lower the speed limit around certain schools, and we can't get some of them below 35 miles per hour just because of the state code and the local jurisdiction's inability to actually change some of that. So
that may have been like the airport road and Rankin Elementary.
it was,
And where that-
Airport Road was a part of that. So
Possibly
was
could have
Whitefish
been, but
Stage.
it was,
Because that is on that urban system.
it was a new change that came down that basically set speed limits per, and I think even collector streets were a part of that. But anyway, I'm really surprised you don't remember it, Mr. Russell, because I used the word bureaucrat when I was talking about it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard you say that word. But I know like on that, it was an issue that we couldn't do it because it's on that state urban
Yeah.
system.
And so I was kind of wondering if that applied to 3 Mile, because I know it's in that category.
Yeah, so 3 Mile Drive is a state urban route. From Meridian to Stillwater, it's an urban route. From Stillwater up to Reserve, within the corridor, is a state secondary route. So,
And those are all covered by state
yeah,
codes.
you fall under the state jurisdiction on establishing certain speeds through the corridor.
So I guess my next comment would be, what good is our comments about this going to be if we have no ability to change it at all?
I think the only thing would be the logic comment that we'd like to see a 35 mile per hour speed limit in that area around the residential subdivisions, and leave the comment.
Okay.
There are areas throughout the state where the Transportation Commission has taken into consideration comment from local entities and reduced speeds below what the study has shown. So there have been some examples throughout the state.
That means I gotta play nice with the governor, I'm not doing it.
Go golf.
He's a big fan of me right now.
Yeah, I know he's a big fan of mine. I listen to radio. General consensus, maybe lob a comment in, asking for consideration of a 35 mile per hour speed limit out through. I mean, I got no problem throwing it out and see what happens, you never know.
Do you have location to location?
From the school zone to,
The school zone out
right?
past the
Meridian
subdivision
to,
around the corner, whatever the,
Well, Meridian, it's already 25 there. So
Right on the.
No, but then it jumps to
Wherever it
45.
jumps above,
Yeah.
yeah. I
it jumps
guess.
from 25 to 35, and then it goes up to 45.
By the
So
bypass, it's
45
45.
to the next
Claire?
zone change.
out past where Wade subdivision is, whatever one that one's called.
I'll just call it Wade subdivision.
Wade subdivision, they'll know.
It goes from 35 to 40 from the junior high, let's say, from the junior high to the bypass, it jumps from 35 to 40. And then from the bypass west, it goes from 40 to 50, going west through the S curves. Those S curves are at 50, and eventually past the S curves going west, it transitions to 55. So really, anything past the S curves is outside of the city's jurisdiction, so
Yeah.
wouldn't be worth commenting on.
Right. That's what I was saying, through that first curve on the S curve.
Yep.
Anything else on that? Public comments. Sorry for making you wait so long.
Good information to know.
Yep.
Did you have public comment, sir?
No, he just shows up every now and then.
He's the 12th member.
He's the 10th man of the council,
man, yeah.
finally showing up, pulling his weight again.
All right. Am I allowed to hand these to council in your honor?
Just over to.
Okay, perfect. Oh, perfect. Thank you, council. My name is Marshall Taylor. I live at 670 Fifth Avenue West North. I have been asked to represent the collective voice of the people you see behind me as part of the working group that has been selected by Mark Flateau to engage in discussions with the Flathead Warming Shelter to come up with measurable and actionable solutions that both parties find agreeable to keep the warming center in operation for this year. Tonight, we were to meet with the Flathead Warming Center, and unfortunately, they no longer want to have discussions with us moving forward, so we've repurposed our time to come and provide you with an update of where we are at. The mayor has asked that the neighborhood work with the Flathead Warming Center to come up with a proposed solution over the course of the next 60 days, starting back in July, to come up with agreements that both the warming center and the neighborhood felt would keep the Flathead Warming Center operating for this season. Moving past the July 16th meeting, we were contacted by Mark Flateau to discuss our concerns and have them notated by him to present to the Flathead Warming Center to propose possible solutions that they could remedy to our concerns that you guys have heard here. A working session was set for August 19th, where both the neighborhood representatives and the representatives from the Flathead Warming Center would come together and brainstorm ideas to hear the concerns that the neighbors had regarding the possible impact that the Flathead Warming Center had had on our neighborhood. Post the discussion, there was an expectation set forth that moving forward for the meeting scheduled tonight, August 26th, that the Flathead Warming Center would come to the neighborhood with actionable and measurable items to address the concerns that we had set forth. On August 22nd, the Flathead Warming Center had sent a letter to the mediators, Mark Flateau, Frank Garner, and Lorraine Clarno, stating that they did not want to have any further discussions with the neighborhood. That is the top letter that you can find attached, as well as the official letter from the Flathead Warming Shelter on the second page. Being disheartened by this news, we had reached back out to the Flathead Warming Center via the mediators to ask if they would still participate in discussions. They would be expected to be fruitful discussions and come with measurable and actionable items that they felt were within their control to address the concerns that we've had. They have sent the following email that you can find attached at the back, stating that they do not want to continue in further discussions with us at this time. The neighborhood that I represent here this evening does not find it meaningful to continue in discussions with the Flathead Warming Shelter, as they have made it clear that they do not want to continue in discussions with us. We'd like to thank you for your time in this manner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment?
Hello, Carly Tuman. I live at 670 Fifth Avenue West North, also known as Mrs. Marshall. I actually wasn't going to talk tonight, but then Buffalo Hill Golf Course got brought up, so I just wanted to share that growing up in that neighborhood, Buffalo Golf Course was in our backyard, and we did get to do a lot of fun things there when we were little. My first job as a waitress was at Buffalo Hill Golf Course, and so I have some good and not so good memories of learning how to waitress there. I also did some sledding on the golf course in the winter months, and I also have a Rotarian father who has spent the last 20 years having their morning meetings hosted there and breakfast, and they do a lot for our community. So just another good example of how that space has been used in different ways to accommodate the community for different things. So also the Steve Dunphy and BJ Newgard, who ran the golf course for a really long time, they're really great people and have been a big contribution to our community besides just on the golfing front there. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'm Renee Demler, 533 West Wyoming Street. We have a lot of thanks and respect to Marshall for representing us. At this time, I would just encourage the council to, again, seriously consider rescinding the conditional use permit since they are not wanting to have any meaningful discussions with us and come to any solutions. So that's kind of where we're at. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none. Mr. Russell, City Manager report.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, next couple of meetings.
Mike.
Thank you. Actually, so I didn't have that. I had the September 5th on there, but that's not actual meeting date. Sent out postcard from Builder Group on September 5th. They're hosting a community event, kind of as a kickoff for some planning related to their operation and activity, related to the park development out there. And everyone's encouraged to be in attendance if you so desire. And we'll put out a notice that there may be a quorum there for elected officials if we have more than a quorum through there.
Doug, what time is that on the 5th?
I would refer you to the email.
Okay,
And they'll be doing some publication as well on it.
Okay.
I just don't have that with me right now.
thank you.
You could be right. Update on that as well. We have the buy-sell signed by BNSF for that property. Now we just have to finish the phase 2 of the environmental. So they have a projected closing on or before November 30th. But at least signed agreement in place, moving forward in that direction. So that is a good step. Put out a press release towards the end of the day when we finally got identified some of the things related to a sewer billing correction. We put out a notice today that there was a data entry error that had like a $2.20 error that's charging more for per 1,000 gallons usage related to sewer. It's not related to the water, it's related to the sewer. Impact on residential will be based upon the winter usage, which we average through that. So, maybe an average of $6 high, $8 high, putting out a corrective billing. So we'll be working on that for the rest of the week to get new bills sent out. For the commercial customers, that may be significantly more. So that would be where the big impacts are. But working on that correction and we'll get new bills put out. So once it was recognized, we started working on it today to get that process in place of going through each account and going through. If someone already pays it, that amount will be credited into the future. So they're not going to be ultimately charged for anything more. We just had an error on that billing component go out with that change in rates. We had a request for a work session on workforce housing that stemmed from maybe a year or so ago when it was brought forward in accordance with new TIF law that you could allow usage of tax increment funding for workforce housing. Have that tentatively scheduled for September 9th. I will not be here at that time, but Jared will lead that discussion. Basically start off with the draft policy that went through the URA, and I think the Planning Commission has brought forward. Ultimately, we kind of set that aside to finish the project that was on there, but we'll start off with that proposed policy that was initially brought forward related to that. So that is scheduled for the 9th. I can't remember if it was 2 weeks ago, last week, discussion on Fairbridge Inn and condition of the property and parcel. I sent out an email today just saying, most of that stuff just is not covered under our current code. When you start talking about security of the building, the structure of the building. So really just put it bluntly, if council wants to go in that direction, we'd recommend looking at a property maintenance code. There's an National Property Maintenance Code related to security of buildings, condition of buildings, but without something of that nature, we just do not have the tools to require some of those things that are being requested. And specifically, it's on the security of the building, the opening of doors, the windows through that component. So
we could be like an HOA? And maybe if we're like an HOA, we could adopt our own zoning regulations the governor could keep his filthy fingers out of? Because HOAs are exempt from state legislation now?
yeah, so it'd still be a municipal code. So we technically would not fall under
Saying?
HOA. All I'm saying is
Citywide
if that
HOA?
is, I am not recommending that we do that. I'm just saying if that's a direction council wants to go. It's just when it breaks down to it, to have an enforcement mechanism for the issues that are there. I've worked in communities where we've had property maintenance code to address things of that nature. And it was that exact same code, the International Property Maintenance Code. Typically
International Property Maintenance Code.
so it's just like the building code, plumbing code.
Okay,
That's just how it's labeled.
dang.
I think it's international. I could be wrong on that pronouncement of the acronym, but it's the same thing as our building code, same organization, plumbing code, mechanical code, all those. But they do have a property maintenance code that frequently gets adopted. But it has that mechanism for a secure door, a secured window. Without that, we just don't have that mechanism. And in all honesty, it hasn't been an issue here because I can tell you that the community we had it did not have the economy that we have here. It was more of a economy that was in regression and you saw property sliding and that circumstance. This is a unique scenario. We'll forward on any of those concerns and complaints that come through. We fully anticipate that that'll be under construction, but we are in that period. But when people have those concerns and they bring them to you, and rightly so, you look to us for what are we going to do about it. I'm just telling you, without a maintenance code, we are not going to be able to do anything to have that tie into, other than strongly encourage them to fix those as quickly as possible. Some of the other concerns are related to trespassing. Well, it has to be the property owner that makes a trespassing complaint. We don't have the authority to go on private property and do those things. Specific crimes have not been identified or reported, so we have limitations on what we can do. So, we talked about at one time tightening up our other nuisance codes, related to community decay and things that really are outside the structure, and talked about strengthening those ordinances and the enforcement of them. We've talked about having a work session in the future. If we want to add, the component of the property maintenance code to that work session sometime this fall, we can do that. I just wanted to bring it up because we're starting to get those complaints. We've received 3 or 4 of them. They're all complaining about the same things that we just do not have the enforcement mechanism for. So with that, if we want to investigate a property maintenance code, I leave it up to the council in terms of if you want to schedule that on a work session.
I'd be willing to have the conversation. I mean, I share some skepticism. I definitely don't want code that looks like HOA code that talks about colors, buildings, and materials used, and what length your lawn is, and all, that sort of stuff. But certainly, there are properties that can become just such a significant nuisance in the community and even a danger that having something to to address that might make sense, but I'm very dependent on what it looks like. So I would like to see it. I think it's worth a discussion at the very least.
So you adopt it in its entirety then? You can't go through and take ideas from it and then go through and incorporate what you like out of it, right? Into
Well,
your own thing.
You can probably exempt certain components or portions of it out. We'd
Okay.
have to take a look at it, but I think
Okay.
you can adopt it with said exemptions. I think may be feasible. We'd have to look into it,
Yeah.
because I know we have some restrictions on code that the state adopts that we are not allowed to do certain things with, but some things we can, because I think we did some modifications. But
I
I
just
think
don't
we
want
went,
to,
I think we
don't
went
want to get into an
higher.
overreach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I've had experience with it, and you get into that circumstance, just being honest
Because
with you, that's what we faced.
I get it. I get what's happening there and everything. I'm really reluctant to go through. I mean, I can have the conversation and see it, but I don't want to go through, like, if there's exemptions and stuff, but we have one area where this is happening, and to go and apply it to the entire city where you're really not going to go through. I think you're casting a wide net, and I want to be careful about that.
I think instead of wasting the council's time and everything reviewing that, why don't I take 10 minutes and call them?
Well,
Say, hey, I've got a number of emails, because I can get the number for the owner.
Well,
And I
we've-
know we've contacted them.
Yeah, we forward them on, and.
it would make sense to me that they would want to go through and take care of their stuff if
Imagine that.
we're
Neighbors
hearing
talking to
from
neighbors. I
people.
mean, dogs, cats. getting along.
Surprisingly-
It's an amazing world.
Surprisingly, I am even against having the conversation.
I'm thinking I'd rather shelve that one for now, is kind of my, yeah, okay. Anything else, Mr. Russell? Anything else I can shoot you down on?
No, that's right. I'm just bringing it up because.
Yeah, no, I know.
What
I
our
know.
response is gonna be when we get these complaints.
I don't see you shedding a tear.
There's pros and cons to everything. You have to find the silver lining. See, water billing, property maintenance, I think I am good.
Okay, anything from council?
I was going to talk about unfunded mandates, but I'll wait till a council session to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. I just want to mention, there was a few years ago, I had proposed design standards for along the Parkline Trail. We have this great plan for what we envision for future development of the Parkline Trail. And unfortunately, that proposal did not move forward. But now we see Flathead Industries, and they're kind of expanding and renovating their facility there on Fifth. And they put a parking lot right next to the trail. And I think you can possibly have a worse thing next to a trail than a parking lot. It's really unfortunate. I think it's really detracting from what we're trying to achieve with the trail through town. It was a missed opportunity that we could have had a better outcome there if we had that design standards in place.
Anything else? The only thing I have, next to the governor, next to the legislature, one of my other favorite topics, League of Cities and Towns. I'm wondering, if we could get maybe a work session with Kelly, just to see what is she hearing might be coming forward in draft bills? What is she helping draft? Will she actually take input from the city of Kalispell and its staff? I just want to try to lay ground rules before, because I was deeply disappointed with the activities in the last session. And I know a couple council members are, but I'd like to maybe get an understanding of what she's seeing, and we understand better her role is what she's looking at, maybe in potential legislation going forward. because I'm gonna serve them with my resignation because it's just too detestable to me to sit on their board now.
So I can answer some of those questions, but there may be follow-up questions council would have.
Right.
So I certainly, if that's fine, if council wants to have that work session. But the League of Cities and Towns crafts a set of resolutions, and I can get that draft set, which is the guiding document. No different than our platform where it's at. No, I think that there may be concerns about adherence to that platform or from there, but it would start off with that resolutions that are adopted by the board through that. But if council would like a work session with the league director, I'm happy to reach out and see if that's set up. And it may be a good idea just to get overall
Yeah.
feedback in terms of, you know, what we can look at and what we anticipate through there. So
I think it would sound good to the council. It'd just be good to understand where they're at.
I'm just seeing a lot of heads nodding, so I'll reach out and see if we can get something set up.
Okay. And that's all I have this evening, so we're adjourned.